Well, I'm very pleased that Sarah is with us live tonight from Warsaw. Also in Warsaw, the editor-in-chief of the Visegrad Insight, Wojciech Szczeberski, and in Brussels, the Global Playbook author and associate editor at Politico, Suzanne Lynch. Lovely to see you all. Thank you for your time tonight. Sarah, let me start with you. Donald Tusk gathering his supporters in Warsaw today for the final rally, and the message was, go to vote if you don't want to go to war. That's pretty stark. Is he worried that people won't turn out?
Yeah, I think so. Traditionally, the turnout for European elections here hasn't been huge. Last time it was around about 46%, I think, but prior to that it had been a lot lower. So I think there is a broad sense here that the big parties in particular need to get people to the polls. They are seeing this as a two-party race between the two main parties here in Poland. Certainly they're battling this out between themselves, and they do need the turnout in order to win that race. So yeah, there has been a call to people to come to the polls. I mean, some people might call it fear-mongering from Donald Tusk. He's certainly been playing the security card strong and hard. And it's interesting because that has been a traditional card for the Law and Justice Party, who are now in opposition. So essentially, you've got the two main parties here who basically think the same in terms of the risk and the threat from Russia on the border. The Law and Justice Party said it for many years. Now in government, the Civic coalition are saying the same, but it has become, I would say, the big theme of this election, not just about, who voters choose here in Poland, but I think also Poland trying to get that broader message across to Europe as a whole, that when there are voices within the EU who are chipping away at the need to support Ukraine and not quite so convinced about the need to stand up to Russia, then Poland certainly, I think, wants to send the message that it at least is standing firm, and it wants that message to be heard throughout the EU member states.
Wojciech, in a lot of countries, the European vote, let's face it, becomes a national referendum on the ruling party. But we've just had elections in Poland, so what do you think is going to motivate people to vote?
Poland's majority in Poland is concerned about security, and security vote is a feeling shared across the two main parties. The previous government, now in opposition, and the current government supporters feel they need to be heard on their concerns for security in many different respects. It is a message that carried through. We just heard that it was the message previously voiced by the previous government. But there are many concerns related to security. There is a hard security concern, there is economic security concern, and there is also a certain concern for disinformation, cyber warfare, things that undermine democracies overall. So in the contest that we see this week in the European parliamentary elections, Donald Tusk government has masterfully put all three under one umbrella. Security dominates the discourse. And despite it might not bring similar turnout at the ballot boxes as in October last year, when it was record high 74%, we might see half the number. It still is resonating largely in the public overall, where the dominant discourse is really security.
Just to pick up on one point you made there, because we heard similar things from the president of Latvia last week on the programme, this interference in the election, the Kremlin trying to play a role in the politics internally. Are you seeing that also in Poland?
We have seen that, and we have been warned. We've read Financial Times warning from several security agencies across Europe, and that concerns Poland as well. Russia plays hard in interfering in the electoral system, in the electoral process in Poland as well. An example of that were cases of arson in Poland. The arrests indicate there are people connected with Russian or pro-Russian groups. There have been a hijack of one of the posts in the Polish press agency, which falsely claimed that Poland is announcing a big draft to get soldiers, to get the population into the army to mobilize against the Russian aggression. So there is attempt to sow confusion, and most importantly, there is a border, and a border along Belarus borders and the borders also with Kaliningrad region with Russia is major concern, number one concern for this government, unlike the previous one, because this is about breaching the EU and NATO borders, organized and orchestrated by special security services, KGB in Belarus and FSB GRU in Russia, in order to instill a sense of insecurity in the population, not only in Poland, but across Europe, when it comes to control of the sovereignty of our territories.
Yeah, I mean, clearly, Susan, we picked up that security is the overwhelming theme, which is reflected in Politico's headlines this week. The EU election in these European frontline states is, you say, is a new iron curtain that's developing. I mean, through this focus on defence and the support for Ukraine that Poland are building in Europe, they obviously have new influence in Brussels. How is the country now seen? Because obviously when the Law and Justice Party were in power, things weren't too clever.
Yes, absolutely. Since this election that was held last October, and we saw the return of Donald Tusk to the premiership in Poland, people here did, most of the EU officials breathe a sigh of relief. And one reason is because Donald Tusk held himself a very senior EU job. He was the president of the European Council here for 5 years and was really the first leader from a Central and Eastern European country to get one of those key jobs. So he's extremely well known here. And look, Poland matters for the EU. Poland is a big country, about 40 million people. It's one of the largest out of all the 27 member states. So people care what's happening in that country, and they're looking closely at how this election will go and whether there is going to be a sign of this residual support for the Law and Justice Party, which, after all, still got the most votes compared to other parties in the last election. So I think Poland's role here is very much as a kind of a leader of the Central and East European countries. We were mentioning there the 35-year anniversary that was being marked today. Also this year, back last month, we saw the 20th anniversary of the big wave of EU accession that happened back in 2004, when 10 mostly former East Bloc countries joined the EU, and Poland was one of those countries and has remained a kind of leading voice there. So, as I say, Poland, very important, very significant country, and is very much taking the lead on this issue of defence and security, which has really dominated European politics since the full-scale invasion by Russia of Ukraine.
And just a view on Donald Tusk, because, as you say, a very prominent figure, particularly in the role that he played within the European Council as president of the Council. Do they breathe a sigh of relief that he's there, given the sort of stuff they get from Orban in Hungary, the things that they get from Slovakia, the drift to the right that we've reported on in this series, and a lot of that within Eastern European countries?
Yes, and I mean, that result that happened in the Polish election before December, that was hugely significant, because I think there was a feeling that if that had stayed with the Law and Justice Party, that this shift to the right would have been cemented. In saying that, Donald Tusk now has to govern, and it's a lot more complex. He has got a coalition government, and he has been hitting back at the EU on certain issues, like agriculture, as we just heard, the whole issue of climate policy, criticising the EU's so-called Green Deal for perhaps being too stringent when it comes to climate targets for farmers, and also migration policy. He's come out and criticised the recent EU asylum pact. So we have seen him, since he's bedded down to lead his new government, be critical when he needs to. So it's difficult for him. He's trying to tread a line here than giving this idea that if you vote for us, we mean a strong Europe, and a Europe that will be stronger and safer for our country that's at the front line, that's just right next door to Russia, while at the same time he is aware that in certain aspects, particularly on migration, for farmers, on climate change, that these issues are not entirely popular in his country. So it's an interesting balancing act now for him.
Really interesting.